Captain Vrix 9 adjusted his viewing screen, three of his compound eyes focusing intently on the transmission from Nexus Academy. His mandibles clicked in disbelief as he watched the security footage replay for the seventh time. A single human male, barely past adolescence, had just walked into Section Delta 7, otherwise known throughout the galaxy as the Killing Floor. "By the Void's embrace," he muttered, his translator struggling with the mixture of amazement and terror in his voice. "Command, are you seeing this?" Admiral Thiss's voice crackled through the comm, her usual stoic demeanor replaced by something approaching hysteria. "Vrix, please tell me this is some sort of elaborate prank. Please tell me that human hasn't actually entered the Nexus Academy's most lethal educational facility." The captain's tertiary eyes swiveled to check the data streams again. "Negative, Admiral. Human designation Marcus Webb, age 17 standard cycles, has indeed voluntarily enrolled in the Predator Female Combat Academy." A long pause filled the communication channel. When Thissa spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone who had just witnessed the impossible. "Vrix, in my 400 years of service, I have seen Zerion battlecruisers flee at the mere mention of Section Delta 7. I have watched Krillian warriors, beings who eat molten steel for breakfast, request transfers to active war zones rather than set foot near that academy. And now you're telling me a human boy just walked in there and smiled?" "Confirmed, Admiral." The smile appears to be genuine. No signs of mental instability, neural manipulation, or chemical enhancement. The human appears to be operating under his own free will. Captain Vrix paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Admiral, what if the legends about humans are actually true?" The transmission from Nexus Academy continued to stream across their screens. The Academy itself was a marvel of engineering, floating in the void between three dying stars, its biometal hull pulsing with an ominous red glow. Section Delta 7 occupied the entire lower hemisphere of the structure, and for good reason. It housed the most dangerous collection of female predators the galaxy had ever assembled in one location. The enrollment list read like a catalog of nightmares. Zara Nightfang, a blood moon huntress whose species hunted by literally smelling fear through dimensions. Kessa Bladedance, a razor claw maiden who could slice through titanium with her fingernails. Yuki Frostbite, an ice demon whose breath could freeze plasma itself. The list went on, each name more terrifying than the last, and into this collection of apex predators walked Marcus Webb, carrying nothing but a standard academy backpack and that insufferable human smile. "Sir," came the voice of Lieutenant Quiche from the sensor station. "I'm reading massive bioenergy spikes from the academy. The female predators are agitated." Captain Vrix's primary eyes focused on the energy readings. The numbers were off the charts. "Define agitated, Lieutenant." "Well, sir, typically when a new student arrives, we see baseline aggression levels around 847 terawatts. Current readings are showing 2,341 terawatts and climbing. The Blood Moon Huntress alone is generating enough killing intent to power a small moon." On the main screen, they watched as Marcus approached the Academy's main entrance. The massive doors, carved from the bones of space leviathans, slowly groaned open. A wave of superheated air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of sulfur, ozone, and something distinctly predatory. Marcus paused at the threshold, tilted his head slightly, and his smile grew wider. "By the seven hells," whispered Captain Vrix, "he's actually enjoying this." The interior of Section Delta 7 was designed to intimidate. The main corridor stretched for nearly a kilometer, its walls lined with the skulls of creatures that had dared to challenge the Academy students. Bioluminescent fungi provided the only light, casting everything in an eerie green glow. The air itself seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Marcus stepped inside, and immediately every conversation stopped. The silence was so complete that the Academy's environmental systems seemed to hold their breath. 97 pairs of eyes, each belonging to a different species of apex predator, focused on the human with the intensity of targeting systems. Zara Nightfang was the first to react. The Blood Moon Huntress rose from her perch near the cafeteria entrance, her 6-foot frame unfolding like a nightmare made flesh. Her skin was the color of dried blood, and her eyes glowed with an inner fire that had been known to drive lesser beings insane. When she spoke, her voice carried the promise of violence. "Human," she growled, the word dripping with contempt. "You have made a mistake. This is not your soft little world where conflicts are resolved with words and feelings. This is where predators are forged in fire and blood." Marcus looked up at her, still smiling, and said, "Cool story. Where's the cafeteria? I heard you guys have pizza Fridays." The silence that followed was so profound that several monitoring stations throughout the galaxy briefly wondered if their equipment had malfunctioned. Zara's expression cycled through confusion, rage, and something that might have been existential crisis. Kessa Bladedance, who had been sharpening her claws on a piece of tungsten, slowly stood up. Her movements were liquid grace, each step a potential killing strike. "Perhaps," she said, her voice like silk wrapped around a vibroblade, "the human doesn't understand the situation he has walked into." She gestured around the corridor with one razor-sharp claw. "Every female in this academy is here because she is too dangerous for normal society. We are the daughters of warriors, the children of nightmares, the products of evolutionary arms races that have raged for millennia. We don't play games, human. We end them." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, then pulled out what appeared to be a standard student tablet. "That's super interesting. But I'm actually more concerned about my class schedule. I'm supposed to have advanced theoretical warfare at 08000, and I really don't want to be late on my first day." The collective intake of breath from 97 predators created a minor atmospheric disturbance. Several of the weaker species actually took a step back. Yuki Frostbite materialized from the shadows near the east wing, her presence dropping the local temperature by 15 degrees. The ice crystals formed in the air around her as she spoke. "Human, your species is known for many things: stubbornness, creativity, an annoying tendency to survive impossible situations. But one thing you are not known for is wisdom. Perhaps you should demonstrate some now and leave while you still can." Marcus looked around at the assembled predators, taking in their various weapons, natural armaments, and barely contained hostility. His smile never wavered. "You know what? You're absolutely right. Humans aren't known for wisdom." He paused, his expression growing thoughtful. "We're known for being absolutely, completely, spectacularly insane, and that's what makes us fun." The effect of these words was immediate and electric. Half the predators recoiled as if they'd been struck. The other half leaned forward, suddenly very interested. In the back of the corridor, something that looked like a cross between a spider and a dragon began making what could only be described as purring sounds. Captain Vrix, monitoring from his ship, felt his blood pressure spike to dangerous levels. "Admiral, are you recording this?" "Every terrifying second of it," came the reply. "Vri, I'm looking at the human's psychological profile. According to his teachers, Marcus Webb is described as pleasant, well-adjusted, and surprisingly normal for a human. His biggest recorded transgression was returning a library book 2 days late. And now he's verbally sparring with the most dangerous collection of female predators in known space," Captain Vrix observed. "Either human psychological evaluations are completely useless, or there's something about their species we fundamentally don't understand." Back in the academy, the tension was reaching critical levels. Several of the predators had begun to circle Marcus, their movements unconscious and predatory. The human, for his part, seemed completely oblivious to the fact that he was potentially seconds away from becoming a very short-lived legend. "So," Marcus said, consulting his tablet again, "does anyone know where room 347B is? I've got Introduction to Galactic Politics, and Professor Slacks apparently has a policy about dismembering students who arrive late." A creature that resembled a humanoid mantis, complete with scythe-like forearms, clicked its mandibles in what might have been amusement. "Human, Professor Slacks's policy about tardiness is the least of your concerns. Her policy about male students is significantly more terminal." "Oh, that's fine," Marcus replied cheerfully. "I'm pretty sure I can handle whatever Professor Slacks dishes out. My mom's a high school principal back on Earth. Trust me." There's nothing scarier than a middle-aged human woman who's dealing with budget cuts and teenage attitude problems. The mantis creature actually took a step back. Your mother terrorizes adolescents professionally? Oh yeah, she's great at it. Last year she made a kid cry just by looking at his report card. And don't even get me started on what happens when someone forgets to sign their permission slip. A low rumble of unease passed through the assembled predators. The concept of a human female whose primary function was the systematic intimidation of young humans was apparently more disturbing than they had prepared for. Zara Nightfang, who had been processing this information with the intensity of a tactical computer, suddenly spoke up. "Human, you say your mother deals with budget cuts every year," Marcus confirmed. "She's got to figure out how to educate 800 kids with basically no money, outdated equipment, and a school board that thinks the solution to every problem is work harder with less." The Blood Moon Huntress's expression grew thoughtful. "And she succeeds at this impossible task?" "Well, yeah. That's what humans do. We take impossible situations and make them work anyway, usually through a combination of stubbornness, creativity, and just enough insanity to convince everyone else we might actually pull it off." The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. This wasn't the silence of predators preparing to strike. This was the silence of creatures beginning to reassess everything they thought they knew about humans. Kessa Bladedance was the first to speak. "Human, perhaps we have underestimated your species. If your mother can survive daily combat with hundreds of hostile adolescents while operating under impossible constraints, then perhaps you are not as helpless as you appear." Marcus's smile grew even wider. If that was possible. "Oh, I'm definitely helpless. I can barely tie my own shoes without instructions. But that's kind of the point, isn't it? Humans don't survive because we're strong or fast or have natural weapons. We survive because we're too stupid to quit and too crazy to die." He looked around at the assembled predators, his expression suddenly becoming more serious. "Look, I know you're all thinking about whether or not to kill me. That's fine. It's probably a reasonable response to a strange male showing up in your territory. But here's the thing about humans that maybe you haven't heard." The corridor had become so quiet that the sound of the Academy's life support systems seemed deafening. "We don't just survive impossible situations," Marcus continued. "We make friends in them. Some of the best relationships in human history started with someone trying to kill someone else. It's weird, but it works for us." He paused, looking directly at Zara Nightfang. "So, Zara, right? I read about Blood Moon Huntresses in the orientation materials. Their species hunts by tracking emotional resonance across dimensional barriers. That's actually incredibly cool. How does the sensory processing work? Do you get overwhelmed in areas with high emotional density? Or do you have some kind of filtering mechanism?" Zara's mouth fell open. In her 3 centuries of existence, no one had ever asked her about the technical aspects of her hunting abilities. Most beings were too busy running or dying to be curious about the methodology. What? I mean, this academy must be like sensory overload for you, right? 97 different predators. All of them probably running hot on aggression and territorial instincts. How do you cope with all that input?" The Blood Moon Huntress stared at the human for a long moment, her expression cycling through confusion, suspicion, and something that might have been fascination. You actually want to know?" "Of course I want to know. I'm sharing a space with you for the next 4 years. Understanding how your abilities work seems like basic courtesy. Plus, it's genuinely interesting. Humans are always curious about things we can't do ourselves." Captain Vreeks, monitoring from his ship, turned to his communications officer. "Were you getting readings on this conversation?" "Yes, sir. The predator's aggression levels are dropping significantly. The human appears to be diffusing the situation." "That's impossible. Section Delta 7 doesn't diffuse. It explodes, usually messily." But the readings didn't lie. As Marcus continued to engage the predators in conversation about their abilities, their hunting techniques, and their homeworlds, the collective hostility in the corridor continued to decrease. More remarkably, several of the predators were actually beginning to respond to his questions. Yuki Frostbite, who had maintained her ice crystal aura throughout the encounter, found herself explaining the thermal dynamics of her species' breath weapon. Bladedance demonstrated the molecular structure of her claws. Even the spider-dragon hybrid in the back had scuttled forward to show off its venom production glands. This is unprecedented. Admiral Thiss's voice crackled through the comm. In 400 years of monitoring this academy, I have never seen the predators engage in non-hostile communication with a new arrival. Ever. I'm beginning to think we've been misunderstanding humans on a fundamental level. This boy isn't surviving their hostility by being stronger or more dangerous. He's surviving it by being genuinely interested in who they are. The first bell of the Academy Day chose that moment to chime, its deep tone reverberating through the biometal hull. Marcus glanced at his tablet and winced. Oh man, I'm totally late for advanced theoretical warfare. Professor Korath is going to have my head. He looked up at the assembled predators with an apologetic expression. Sorry guys, we'll have to continue this later. But thank you for the explanations. This is going to be such a cool year. He started jogging down the corridor toward the East Wing, leaving behind 97 of the galaxy's most dangerous predators in various states of bewilderment. Zara Nightfang watched him go, her expression thoughtful. Sisters, she said slowly, I believe we may have encountered something more dangerous than any of us. Bladedance's claws retracted slightly. You think the human is a threat? No, Zara replied, her voice carrying a note of wonder. I think he's something far worse. He's likable. The implications of this statement hung in the air like a weapon waiting to be fired. Throughout the galaxy, predator species had survived by maintaining clear hierarchies, territorial boundaries, and healthy levels of mutual suspicion. The idea of a creature that could simply bypass all of these carefully evolved social defenses through genuine friendliness was more terrifying than any weapon. As Marcus disappeared around the corner, still jogging and still smiling, the assembled predators began to slowly disperse, but their conversations were different now. Instead of discussing territory and dominance, they found themselves talking about the human's questions, his obvious curiosity, and the strange warmth they had felt when he looked at them like they were interesting rather than terrifying. Captain Vrix closed the transmission feed and leaned back in his command chair. Admiral, I'm filing a formal request for extended monitoring of this situation. Granted. Vrix, if this human survives his first week at the Academy, it could change everything we know about predator-prey dynamics. And if he doesn't survive? Admiral Thiss was quiet for a long moment before responding. Then we'll have learned that even human insanity has its limits. As the captain signed off, the Academy continued its daily routine, but something had fundamentally shifted in Section Delta 7. For the first time in its history, the most dangerous collection of female predators in the galaxy found themselves looking forward to lunch period, not because of the hunting opportunities it provided, but because they were curious to hear more about Earth, humans, and the boy who had walked into their domain and smiled. In room 347B, Professor Korath, a towering draconic whose teaching method involved actual fire breathing, looked up as Marcus slipped quietly through the door. You're late, human, she rumbled, smoke curling from her nostrils. Marcus nodded, still slightly out of breath from his jog. Sorry, Professor. I got caught up talking with my classmates in the corridor. Did you know that blood moon huntresses can track emotional resonance across dimensional barriers? That's amazing. Professor Korath's prepared lecture about punctuality died in her throat. In her 50 years of teaching, no student had ever responded to her intimidation with enthusiasm about xenobiology. She stared at the human for a long moment, then slowly closed her mouth, extinguishing the preparatory flames. Take a seat, human. We have much to discuss. As Marcus settled into his chair, still smiling, Professor Korath found herself wondering if perhaps the Academy's orientation materials needed updating. Traditional warnings about respect, hierarchy, and survival seemed inadequate when dealing with a species that treated mortal danger as a social opportunity. The lesson that followed would later be described by monitoring stations throughout the sector as unprecedented, impossible, and requiring immediate psychological evaluation of all observers. But for Marcus Webb, it was just the beginning of what he was sure would be the best 4 years of his life. 3 weeks into Marcus Webb's enrollment at Section Delta 7, Captain Vrix had developed what his medical officer described as chronic stress-induced molting. His outer carapace was shedding at an alarming rate, leaving small chitinous flakes scattered around his command station. "Sir," Lieutenant Q.S. announced, her voice carrying the exhausted tone of someone who had been monitoring impossible situations for too long, "we're receiving another priority transmission from the Academy. The humans have done something." "What do you mean, the humans?" Captain Vrix's compound eyes swiveled toward the communication station. "There's only one human at the Academy." "Not anymore, sir. Apparently Marcus Webb sent recruitment videos back to Earth. We're now tracking 17 additional human transports en route to Nexus Academy." Admiral This's voice crackled through the comm channel, barely containing hysteria. "Vree, please tell me this is some sort of elaborate joke. Please tell me that one human hasn't somehow convinced 17 more of his species to voluntarily enter the galaxy's most lethal educational facility." Captain Vrix activated the main viewing screen, displaying the latest footage from Section Delta 7. What he saw defied every principle of predator behavior he had studied in his 3 centuries of military service. The main corridor, which 3 weeks ago had resembled a tense standoff between apex predators, now looked like something from a different reality entirely. Marcus sat cross-legged on the floor near the cafeteria entrance, surrounded by a loose circle of the galaxy's most dangerous females. They were talking. Not growling, not posturing, not establishing dominance hierarchies, actually talking. "Zara," Marcus was saying, gesturing enthusiastically with his hands, "you've got to try Earth music. I'm telling you, heavy metal was basically invented for Blood Moon huntresses. The emotional resonance alone would give you a completely new hunting advantage." Zara Nightfang, who 3 weeks ago had been contemplating 17 different ways to dismember the human, was now leaning forward with genuine interest. "This heavy metal generates emotional resonance patterns?" "Oh yeah, massive ones. Fear, anger, rebellion, existential angst. It's like emotional bait for teenagers. You could probably track a human adolescent from 3 star systems away if they were listening to death metal." Kessa Bladidance, her razor-sharp claws carefully retracted, nodded thoughtfully. "This could revolutionize hunting techniques across multiple species." "Marcus, do you have recordings of this music?" "Better than that," Marcus grinned, pulling out a small device. "I've got my entire collection right here. Wait until you hear what humans call Screamo. It's basically weaponized emotional trauma set to a beat." Captain Vrix felt his stress molting accelerate. "Admiral, are we watching the most dangerous predators in the galaxy discuss music theory with a human teenager?" "That's exactly what we're watching, Vrix. And it gets worse. According to the Academy's psychological monitoring systems, the predators' overall aggression levels have decreased by 67% since the humans' arrival. Their academic performance has improved by 42%. They're even eating meals together instead of competing for territorial dominance in the cafeteria." The viewing screen shifted to show the Academy's dining hall, which had undergone its own impossible transformation. Tables that had previously been claimed by individual species were now occupied by mixed groups. Yuki Frostbite sat next to a flame serpent from the magma worlds, their opposing thermal natures somehow coexisting peacefully. The spider-dragon hybrid that everyone called Silk was engaged in animated conversation with a trio of void stalkers, comparing web-spinning techniques with shadow manipulation. And at the center of it all sat Marcus, mediating a debate between 2 apex hunters about the relative merits of pursuit versus ambush tactics, and while simultaneously helping a young Thornback with her calculus homework. "This is unprecedented," Admiral This continued. "Vrix, we're looking at a complete breakdown of established predator social structures. These creatures should be at each other's throats, not sharing meal preparation duties." As if summoned by her words, the viewing screen focused on the kitchen area, where something even more impossible was taking place. Marcus stood at one of the preparation stations, wearing what appeared to be a makeshift apron, teaching a group of carnivorous predators how to make pizza. Okay, so the trick with pizza dough, Marcus was explaining to his audience of razor-clawed killers, is that you have to let it rest. I know. Patience isn't exactly a predator virtue, but trust me on this. Good pizza is worth waiting for. Zara, who had never prepared food that wasn't freshly killed, watched in fascination as Marcus demonstrated the kneading technique. Human, your species dedicates significant time to food preparation rituals? Oh, absolutely. Humans bond over food like crazy. Some of our most important social interactions happen in kitchens. We've got entire television networks dedicated to people making food and arguing about it. A creature that resembled a cross between a wolf and a mantis raised one clawed appendage. Your species broadcasts food preparation competitions? We broadcast food preparation everything. Competitions, documentaries, reality shows where people get eliminated for making bad soup. One of our most popular shows is just a guy traveling around eating weird stuff and telling people about it. The predators exchanged glances, a complex communication passing between species that had never previously found common ground. Silk, the spider-dragon hybrid, clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. This explains much about human social structure. You bond through shared consumption experiences rather than dominance displays. Well, yeah, I mean, we do dominance displays too, but we call them family dinners. Much more civilized than actual combat, but sometimes just as deadly. Captain Vrix turned away from the screen, unable to process any more impossibility. Lieutenant Kiesh, what's the status on those incoming human transports? First ship arrives in 6 standard hours, sir. According to the manifest, it's carrying 12 humans between the ages of 16 and 18. All volunteers. All apparently convinced by Marcus Webb's recruitment message that Section Delta 7 would be, and I quote, the most amazing educational experience in the galaxy. And what did his recruitment message say? Lieutenant Qesh pulled up the transmission log, her expression growing increasingly bewildered as she read. Sir, it appears to be a 20-minute video of Marcus giving a tour of the academy while casually chatting with various predators. He introduces Zara as basically a living emotion detector with really cool skin, describes Kessa as like a knife made out of a person, but friendly, and refers to Yuki as living air conditioning with attitude. That's it? That's what convinced 17 humans to voluntarily enter the most dangerous place in the galaxy? Well, sir, there's also a section where he demonstrates the Academy's food synthesizers, shows off his room, which he's apparently decorated with something called Earth memorabilia, and concludes with what he calls study group footage of him helping various predators with their homework. Admiral This's voice carried the weight of someone who had given up trying to understand the universe. Vrakes. I'm looking at the psychological profiles of the incoming humans. They're all described as typical teenagers. Their biggest concerns appear to be things like fitting in, making friends, and having authentic experiences. And they think befriending Galaxy-class predators qualifies as an authentic experience? Apparently so. One of them, a female named Jenny Martinez, submitted an essay explaining that she wanted to attend because, quote, it seems like the kind of place where you'd really grow as a person. Another one, David Kim, wrote that he was excited about learning from people with different perspectives on life. Captain Vrix's molting reached critical levels. Admiral, what if this is just how humans are? What if their entire species approaches mortal danger as a social opportunity? Before Admiral Thys could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Lieutenant Keish's voice cut through the chaos. Sir, we're detecting massive energy readings from Section Delta 7. Something's happening. The main screen flickered to life, showing the Academy's central courtyard. What they saw there would later require an entirely new classification system for impossible events. Marcus stood in the center of the courtyard, but he wasn't alone. Surrounding him were all 97 female predators from Section Delta 7, but their arrangement was unlike anything previously recorded. Instead of the typical territorial spacing that predators maintained, they were organized in what appeared to be a formation. Are they dancing? Captain Vrix whispered. They were indeed dancing. Or rather, They were attempting to follow Marcus's enthusiastic demonstration of something he called line dancing. The sight of a blood moon huntress trying to coordinate her movements with a razor claw maiden while both attempted to follow the rhythm patterns of Earth country music was so surreal that several monitoring stations throughout the sector briefly wondered if their equipment was malfunctioning. "This is impossible," Admiral Thissa muttered. "Predators don't dance. They don't coordinate non-violent group activities. They certainly don't follow the lead of prey species." But the evidence was undeniable. Yuki Frostbite was actually laughing as she missed a step and bumped into Silk, who chittered in what could only be described as amusement. Kessa Bladidance had somehow managed to coordinate her razor-sharp claws to clap along with the music without decapitating anyone. And Marcus, oblivious to the fact that he was orchestrating the most unprecedented social event in galactic history, was simply enjoying himself. "Okay, everyone, that was great," he called out as the music ended. "Tomorrow we'll work on the electric slide. It's a little more complicated, but I think you're all ready for it." Zara approached him, her expression thoughtful. "Marcus, this group coordination activity serves what purpose for human social bonding?" "Well, it's fun, first of all. But it also teaches cooperation, rhythm, and how to look completely ridiculous while still having a good time. Plus, it's one of those activities where everyone looks equally silly, so nobody feels left out." The Predators considered this explanation with the seriousness they might normally reserve for battle tactics. Silk raised one of her multiple appendages. "Human, your species deliberately engages in activities where competence is not the primary objective?" "Oh, absolutely. Some of the best human activities are the ones where being good at them isn't really the point. Dancing, singing in the shower, playing games with friends. The fun comes from doing them together, not from being perfect at them." A low murmur passed through the assembled Predators. This concept, more than any weapon or threat, seemed to shake them to their core. Kessa's voice was quiet when she spoke. "On my world, activities without clear dominance hierarchies are considered wasteful. That's because your world never discovered the joy of being terrible at something with friends," Marcus replied cheerfully. "Trust me, some of my best memories involved being spectacularly bad at things while people I care about were equally bad at the same things." Captain Vreeks closed the transmission feed, unable to process any more impossibility. "Admiral, I need to file a formal report about this situation, but I honestly don't know how to classify it. Try first contact protocol violation, human weaponization of friendship," Admiral Thissa suggested wearily. "At this rate, we're going to need entirely new categories for whatever happens next." What happened next exceeded even their expanded capacity for impossibility. The first transport of additional humans arrived 6 hours later, and Marcus met them at the docking bay with what could only be described as a welcome committee. 17 of the most dangerous predators in the galaxy stood arranged in a semicircle behind him, each wearing what appeared to be handmade name tags. The humans disembarked from their transport with the casual confidence of teenagers arriving at summer camp. They looked around at the assembled predators, took in the Academy's intimidating architecture, and their collective reaction was enthusiastic approval. "Oh wow," said Jenny Martinez, a 17-year-old with bright pink hair. "This is so much cooler than the videos." "Zara, right? Marcus told us about your dimensional tracking abilities. That's absolutely incredible." Zara, who had been prepared for fear, territorial challenge, or at least appropriate respect, found herself once again completely disarmed by human curiosity. David Kim, meanwhile, had approached Yuki Frostbite with the fearless enthusiasm of someone who had never learned that ice demons were traditionally considered omens of death. "Yuki, I have to ask, does your thermal control extend to precision temperature manipulation? Because I'm working on a physics project about heat transfer, and I would love to get your perspective on molecular kinetic energy." Yuki, who had never been asked to contribute to academic research, felt something she had never experienced before, pride that wasn't based on successful hunting. Within 30 minutes of their arrival, the 17 new humans had been integrated into the Academy's social structure with an efficiency that defied every known principle of predator behavior. They brought with them Earth music, games, snacks, and most importantly, an infectious enthusiasm for learning about the galaxy's most dangerous creatures. Captain Vree, monitoring from his ship, watched as the impossible became routine. Humans teaching predators card games, predators explaining hunting techniques to fascinated teenagers, mixed species study groups working on quantum mechanics while sharing something called trail mix. "Admiral," he said finally, "I think we need to reconsider everything we know about threat assessment." They agreed. "Vrakes, these humans aren't surviving the Academy despite being prey species. They're transforming it into something entirely new. What do we call that?" Admiral This was quiet for a long moment before responding. "I think we call it school." 6 months later, Section Delta 7 had become something unprecedented in galactic history. It was a functional educational institution where the galaxy's most dangerous predators learned alongside the galaxy's most inexplicably social prey species. Academic performance was at an all-time high. Violence was at an all-time low. And applications from other species were pouring in at a rate that required expansion of the Academy's physical structure. The humans, for their part, treated their daily interactions with apex predators as perfectly normal. They formed study groups, organized social activities, and maintained the kind of casual friendships that made hardened military observers question their understanding of reality. Marcus Webb, the boy who had walked into the most dangerous classroom in the galaxy and smiled, became something the galaxy had never seen before, a human who accidentally revolutionized interspecies relations simply by being interested in making friends. His final report to Earth, transmitted at the end of his first semester, contained a single line that would be studied by xenobiologists for generations. Turns out, the scariest creatures in the galaxy just needed someone to ask them how their day was going. And throughout the sector, monitoring stations quietly updated their threat assessment protocols to include a new category: human social engineering. Approach with curiosity, but not caution. The most dangerous girl class in the galaxy had discovered something more powerful than any weapon, more effective than any hunting technique, and more transformative than any evolutionary adaptation. They had discovered friendship, and they were never the same again.